Legend has it that Zack Snyder once pitched an idea he had for a Star Wars movie to Disney, and they turned him down. And he ended up reworking that concept into an original idea called Rebel Moon. And now we have a trailer for that project, and how ironic is it that a 3-minute trailer looks more interesting than anything Disney Star Wars has produced in its entire existence? Let's discuss.
I watch so you don't have to.
All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
As we all know, Zack Snyder is one of the most hated directors in Hollywood right now for unknown reasons. Some of you may not know this, but coverage of Zack Snyder's films by certain YouTubers is at least partially responsible for me creating my own channel. You see, it's one thing to not like something that this man creates. It's another thing altogether to launch personal and frankly disgusting attacks against him simply because he made a Superman movie that you don't agree with.
I knew it. I'm surrounded by assholes.
It was this extreme, rage-filled hate for this guy who just seemingly loves filmmaking and is constantly praised by his peers that raised a bunch of red flags for me and made me start looking at certain content creators differently. What do I always say on this channel? If you take your emotions out of it and judge something fairly, I'll listen to any praise or criticism you might have for that specific thing, whether I like it or not. You see, because that's typically how film discussion works.
That makes sense.
If you are one of those people who resort back to the same old talking points, Zack Snyder just tries to be edgy, or Zack Snyder doesn't do anything but slow motion, basically feeding into those false online narratives, then we really don't have much to talk about. Here's how I personally view Zack Snyder. I don't think that everything that he's ever done is perfect, but he is without a doubt one of the most amazing directors from a visual perspective.
I like it a lot.
Saying that, I also don't take anything away from him from some of his storytelling capabilities either. A lot of people have given him flack over the years for some of his DC movies, and to me, ironically, those have been some of his best works. If nothing else, I like that he takes the characters and the mythology seriously, and that's rare in this day and age of goofball antics in comic book movies.
Whatever it is that you're offering, we're not into it. Don't care, couldn't care less.
A big reason I enjoyed Zack's work from the beginning was that he offered an alternative to what we were typically getting in the comic book movie genre. To me, his highly stylized and tonally driven films were a breath of fresh air, especially as franchises like the MCU got more and more formulaic and forgettable. It will be very interesting to see how Rebel Moon turns out, because this is Zack once again dipping his toes into a genre that feels very stale right now, overall. Especially since Disney has turned Star Wars into a shell of its former self. My only real concern with Rebel Moon is that I typically enjoy Zack's adaptations more so than I enjoy his original concepts. To me, Zack Snyder thrives when he has a foundation, a starting point, and he builds on that foundation, adding his own cinematic flair to it. The only two films that I really didn't enjoy from him were Sucker Punch and Army of the Dead, both original concepts.
Not impressed.
But perhaps Rebel Moon's early origins as a Star Wars story will benefit the film in the long run. Not only does that give Zack a jumping off point, it also gives us, the audience, a reference point. Now we will get to see what a unique creative mind could have brought to the dying Star Wars brand.
Do or do not. There is no try.
Right off the bat, the Rebel Moon trailer has a very epic feel to it, and I wouldn't expect anything less from Zack Snyder. He rarely ever does anything on a small scale. I mean, he made a 4-hour Justice League movie after all. Also consistent with his style, the movie looks to be very visually pleasing. It looks like something that should probably be viewed on the big screen, so the fact that it's on Netflix is a bit of a drawback. Maybe we'll get lucky and we'll get a limited theatrical release or IMAX release at some point.
Come on. Do it. Do it!
Right off the bat, I got strong Gladiator-inspired vibes from the music and from the hands in the wheat field. The Gladiator connections continue with the inclusion of actual Gladiator actors, and he's one of those actors that I'm always pleasantly surprised to see whenever he shows up in a film. We have a voiceover from the legendary Anthony Hopkins as he introduces us to the story of Princess Issa, the tale of a chosen one who is intended to bring peace to the world that they currently inhabit. Now, the trope of a chosen one is something that's been used in films a lot, obviously. It's also something that frankly never gets old whenever it's told in the right way. There will always be an appeal to seeing the hero's journey, to seeing a character fulfill his or her destiny. The key is always going to be building that character up properly, and making the audience want to go with them on this journey. And the worlds of Rebel Moon are clearly in tumultuous times, and in desperate need of a hero just like that. We see a lot of death and destruction, and I'm sure there's going to be an aspect to this film with a kingdom oppressing its people. Similar, of course, to the Empire or the First Order from Star Wars.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I believe it's been rumored that the villains of the story are invading worlds and stealing resources, something else that's a common trope in sci-fi stories. And the main character of Korra is on the ground level of that conflict, appearing to have to deal with the prospect of her homeland being infiltrated. I felt like the ship design and the CGI creation of the ships was very reminiscent of the CGI in Man of Steel, CGI that has aged brilliantly, by the way. Some of the character design, specifically the alien characters, look very visually interesting, which is ironically another thing that Star Wars has been lacking in lately. Modern Star Wars feels very mundane and boring and lifeless, and Zack has clearly chose to make his world in Rebel Moon feel more alive. And that includes a lot of different species interacting with each other. That is what you want, after all, when you're watching a sci-fi epic. There's also a little nod to lightsabers, with one character wielding dual blades. And the blades design look like a cross between traditional lasers and flames. It was pretty cool. There's a line towards the end of the trailer that sums up exactly how Zack Snyder feels about his characters typically. As we see Korra knee-deep in a rebellion of sorts, we hear Anthony Hopkins say a myth is indestructible. And I think that's the biggest contribution that Zack Snyder makes to the characters in his films. His characters always feel important and like mythical beings, more so than your average everyday generic film character. A big problem in modern cinema is that characters typically don't feel special, and also the stakes in their conflicts feel very low. It's difficult to get invested in a story when the story doesn't give you a reason to care about what's going on. And this story is very clearly going to be about protecting what you love, whether that be your home or your family, and simply fighting for your freedom. And what could possibly be more relatable than that? If I had one criticism of the trailer, it would be that some of the costume designs do look a little cheap and like a made-for-TV movie. Not all of them, but some of the designs did leave a bit to be desired. But I'm willing to wait and see how it plays out in full context before I judge it completely. Overall, in a day and age where trailers are typically just as boring as the movies they are promoting, I felt like this trailer did a great job at selling people on the prospect of wanting to dive into this new world. You know, like a trailer is supposed to do.
Because it's all part of the plan.
And even if some of the story elements do feel familiar, I'm okay with that as long as Zack puts his own fresh spin on them, which you know he is going to do. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how this film pans out. And when it comes right down to it, whether you love or hate Zack Snyder, you can't deny that his work always demands some level of attention, which is more than I can say for most films in this age of studio-driven filmmaking. Zack is a filmmaker with a unique style and vision, and that alone will always make me excited for what he might bring to the table.
Y'all be cool. Right on.